that we need solutions now. So I'm trying to engage those groups now to go beyond just believing in it and actually advocating for it, and also just creating a space to say we do get to do this as climate activists. We have climate science on our side.
Did you know that there are 500,000 metric tons of nuclear waste temporarily stored at hundreds of sites worldwide? In the US alone, 1 in 3 people live within 50 miles of a storage site. No country has yet successfully disposed of commercial spent nuclear fuel, but it's not for lack of a solution. So what's the delay? The answers are complex and controversial. In this series, we explore the nuclear waste issue with people representing various pieces of this complicated puzzle. We hope this podcast will give you a clearer picture of nuclear waste, the whole story. We believe that listening is an important element of a successful nuclear waste disposal program. A core company value is to seek and listen to different perspectives. Opinions expressed by the interviewers and their subjects are not necessarily representative of the company. If there's a topic discussed in the podcast that is unfamiliar to you, or you'd like to more closely review what was said, please see the show notes at deepisolation.com/podcasts.
Hello, I'm Kara Hulak, Deep Isolation Communications Manager. My guest today is Zion Light, a British author and environmental activist. She's the co-founder of Emergency Reactor, a new effort to raise awareness around the importance of nuclear energy in the fight against climate change. In 2020, she worked as UK director of the group Environmental Progress by Michael Schellenberger. Welcome, Zion. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on today.
Let's start by you sharing your journey on the road to becoming an environmental activist. You've described yourself as caring deeply about the earth since you were a child and said you had eco-anxiety. So maybe share what that is and why do you think you've always felt that way?
I was quite young when I first learned about global warming at school, which is what we called it at the time. And I did have a kind of eco-anxiety. I used to have nightmares that everything was going to go underwater, and my parents sort of didn't really know what to do with me, and they didn't understand it. And actually, generally, then it wasn't very well understood anyway, and people didn't really seem concerned about it. So I started getting involved with different campaigns, trying to get my parents to recycle and going vegetarian. I was quite young, sort of 10, 11. And I think they just found it very annoying and they didn't really understand what I was doing. But that was the beginning. It wasn't until I left home at 18 for university where I sort of found a group of people who had similar concerns, and we set up our first group. And then from there, I kind of got involved with a lot of different activism over the years.
And what did you study at university? Did you follow that path for your education?
No, I actually studied English literature. I come from an art background, but then later I went on to do a master's in science communication because I became more interested in science, and so that actually that's a big part of what we need to be talking about. And was kind of lucky in a way that I didn't. People often ask me, "Are you really interested in science? Really excited about this? Why didn't you study it as a kid?" Well, actually, I grew up in a very poor inner city area where we didn't have very good education options, and I really didn't learn very much at school. Science was not really an option. Someone of my background at that time.
And then how did having children impact your environmentalism and lead you to write a book on green parenting? What were you hoping to convey to your readers with that book?
It's interesting because I think a lot of people now are kind of talking about not wanting to have children and how awful it is, how awful the world is, and why would you want to bring kids into this world? And I feel like I got a lot of that out of my system when I was younger, and I was really worried. And then getting involved with the groups and taking action and seeing that there have been some gains. I know that they haven't been enough gains over the years, but things have been shifting. That's actually made me more hopeful and more likely to bring children into the world, which I did. And what I found with that was that I had children and I wanted to teach them about the environment and climate change, and there were just no books about it at the time. My oldest daughter is 10. There's a lot more literature out there now for them, as they're learning about climate change at school, and there's so much now. But when I first had her, there was really nothing, and the kind of green parenting books I was reading just just didn't really have a lot of useful information. So I authored the book Green Parenting to help other parents like me who might want to help teach their kids about things and also live with a low carbon footprint as a family, because that was, you know, kind of what everyone was talking about doing. But it's much harder if you have children. But also I think, you know, people think, what's the point if you have children? They're bringing emissions into the world. But actually, having 3 children is seen as kind of a sustainable number, because we have this kind of aging population. So I don't, you know, and I don't think it's really about number of people anyway. I think we're a bit distracted talking about that. I think it's about how we live and our consumption, really.
And so there's, you know, obviously it's a huge topic, the topic of environmentalists being supportive of nuclear energy as being key in the fight against climate change. So when did you first become passionate about that type of energy source? Was there a point where you were against it and you changed over? Or tell us about your journey to being such a passionate supporter of clean energy.
So for the most part, for most of my life, I was against it. When you join these kind of green groups, everybody's against it and you're just against it. I noticed that there was a difference between me and other people in some of these groups, because also, for example, in the green parenting community, a lot of people are anti-vaccination, and I never was. I always kind of understood the value and the need, but I was kind of different because I'd done this thing to my kids that they didn't approve of. So I noticed quite early on that I had some different ideas, and I thought maybe that's, you know, from a very different background, immigrant, you know, I grew up in very poor inner city Birmingham. Maybe, you know, I thought maybe I have a different understanding of things, and this sort of then led to the energy revelation for me, which is that I was kind of against, and I was, you know, writing a book on how to live with less energy. And I agree, we really should be less wasteful. But it's not to say that developing countries shouldn't have development and lots of, you know, energy, which we have, right? We're very energy rich, we're very lucky. You switch the light switch on and you expect the light to come on. You know, you don't have to live in darkness, you don't have to wash your clothes by hand. And I have an understanding of that because that's what my parents came from and that's what they left behind. And it's very hard for them to leave behind in the 60s, because they left all their family and all their culture behind for a country that they knew nothing about. You know, they came to Britain because there was this big industrial boom in Birmingham at the time. There were lots of jobs. They were offered these factory jobs. You know, I always had this kind of understanding of why they left this place behind, which was their home, really. It's quite a phenomenal thing to do, and to come here and not have those support networks that are really important in those communities. They did it because they wanted high energy lifestyles, right? They wanted lifestyles where, you know, people have access to things that they don't have back in this little village in the Punjab in India, and billions of people around the world live like that. When you talk about poverty, it's energy poverty, really. And so although I've always cared about climate change, I was also involved in lots of other groups. When I was a teenager, I was in Amnesty International, I was in War on Want. I cared about these issues as well, but what I sort of started noticing was that there was a lot of joining up between kind of the green group and the human rights groups, and to me these are actually really just the same issues. And if we care about, you know, people and planet, you know, you can't separate people out from nature. So when I started realizing I was wrong about nuclear, you know, it was a friend of mine who's an engineer who sent me something specifically about Fukushima, which I had been told had killed lots of people. And he sent me this research, very clearly said no one died because of the nuclear meltdown. People did die because of tsunami and earthquake. It was really a really big thing for me, because I believed completely the wrong thing for years, and I told people the wrong thing, and I felt bad. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm a bit like the anti-vaxxers and I have the wrong views. So I started looking into it more, and he was very helpful. He was very good at, you know, not pushing me, but if I asked for a resource, he'd send it. And, you know, this is where, you know, is really getting into science anyway and thinking, oh, you know, everyone should know these facts. But what I noticed was when I'd go back to my green friends and tell them, we don't want to know that. They'd say, who's gotten to you? We don't want to know that. And I kind of went, oh no, there's this difference again between me and them. I would say to them, you know, I understand about saying people here should live with less, but what about people in developing countries? And this is where the real kind of punch point came for me, and I became passionate about energy, because their arguments are today still they don't get to develop, don't get to have what we had because we mess things up. And I don't agree with that. I have all these relatives in India who want what we have, right? They want lighting that works. And it's not just about lighting. When you think about energy, we're so used to it. We don't think about how we only have this infrastructure and a high quality of life because we had lots of energy, which was okay, it had consequences and lots of fossil fuels. What if we could have done that without consequences? And wouldn't that still be a good thing? It means your kids live longer, they're healthier, you live longer, you have the air quality, you have access to education, you have infrastructure that allows you access to hospitals, which don't have blackouts, which are really, bad blackouts, and bad people die during blackouts. When I started realizing that nuclear wasn't as dangerous as I've been led to believe, fossil fuels are as dangerous as I've always known, I realized, hey, we've almost been kind of tricked and told to be against this thing that could actually displace fossil fuels, which renewables can too, but the renewables still need that baseload power, and that is nuclear. So I became passionate about it really because of energy poverty, because I thought someone needs to show these opinions out there, because telling these countries now, as you'll have seen around COP26 and people saying India's so bad, not phasing out coal. Well, can we really say that to them? I understand that we need to phase out coal, but then they're going to need options, lots of energy, so that they can develop infrastructure the way we did, which we did burning a vast amount of fossil fuels. And actually, if they don't do that, they're really in water. Literally, because these are the countries in the global south that are going to suffer the most because of climate change, and they can have infrastructure now to protect them. They can develop to protect themselves. They cannot do that with vast amounts of energy. And then you've got these environmental NGOs saying, we don't want you to have fossil fuels or nuclear. A few wind farms or solar panels isn't enough. Like, they can have them, great, and in some places they work really well. It's not enough. It's not what we had. We had vast amounts of energy. So that's really why I'm out there and why I've become passionate about it. It's because I care about these people.
Well, I love how you bring your history and your family background into this. I mean, do you remember that? How old were you when you came to the UK, or was this more your parents experiencing this?
So I was born here, but my parents took me. My parents took me to India a few times. They took me when I was very young, and I only have very vague memories. But they took me when I was I think I was 19 or 20, is really good age actually, go to this village in the middle of nowhere. And I didn't really understand what they come from until then. So we, you get flying to the nearest airport before I gave up flying, and 4-hour journey to get to this village. And then you get to the village, and you have to understand about there not being any infrastructure. There's no Google Maps, right? There's no internet, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no charging points for your phone. You're completely cut off. There's no street signs. We had to keep stopping. I mean, we didn't drive there because the roads are crazy, so we had a driver, and he'd have to keep stopping and asking people, do you know where this family with this surname lives? That's how we found this little village in the middle of nowhere. So people ask me, what's the village called? I can tell you it's in Ahimsa. I can't tell you where it is on a map. These places have not been mapped. These people live with nothing. They live in absolute poverty. And then you go past these, shacks, and sometimes you get some buildings, mostly because people have moved out and been able to put some money into those areas, But millions of people live like this, and you really get a sense of it when you're driving through, and it's just millions and millions of people crammed in, living very low carbon lifestyles, but under duress, and they don't want to live like that. They would take the first opportunity to not have to, because live with serious consequences of illnesses and the lack of treatment and the lack of health care and vaccinations and all the things that we're really privileged to have. And then we stayed there for 3 weeks. It was really hard. I mean, I'd never experienced anything like that before. I was kind of like angry at my parents, why have you put me here with there's nothing to do. I mean, all right, people spend time together and they're rice farmers, so they do that. But I mean, it's a really, really dire way of living. And I'm not saying that, people can really, I think the Green Movement has this thing with idolize it. They idolize poverty. Oh, they live on the land and they have communities. I even had someone say they don't have mental health issues because they live in communities. Oh, they do have mental health issues. When your baby dies, before it's a year old, you have 6 babies and there's a chance that most of them won't make it. They have mental health issues, sure they do, just not writing blogs about it that you read about, because they don't have access, they don't have a voice on the stage. And that's where I realized that, wow, someone should be getting this out there. I mean, everybody thinks they know about poverty, but do we really appreciate that 2 billion people live in the state? And it is energy poverty. It's that lack of infrastructure that we built through lots of energy and development, and it's economic development. And you can do that without increasing emissions. There have been countries that have shown that you can do that. So that you can, they're also separate issues, but they get lumped together by this movement, which just thinks living back on the land is really lovely. And no, it's not actually. No, it's not. And I love nature, but when you live somewhere like that, where there's wild snakes everywhere, and there's no protection from them. I remember just hearing awful stories about people being bitten by snakes and having horrific deaths because the nearest hospital is 4 hours away. Even if you had a car, which most of them don't, right? They don't have cars. Even if even if you had access, it's just a very unhappy existence. People are just surviving, basically. And if they survive the day, then they're happy, they're grateful. And that's it, really. And they don't just want lighting and hospitals. They want laptops and mobile phones. They want everything that we are privy to, and that is part of having high quality of life. And we have to make peace with that in the green movement, instead of saying no, they can't have more. Sure, we can live with less, but they also need to have more. So it was really eye-opening, and I am glad now that my parents took me, even though I remember when I left, they said I'm never coming back, which is really sad because all my so much family there who really love and miss us, and I felt guilty coming back and looking at everything that I have that they don't have and will never have access to, that they'll never, be able to enjoy. And not just that now, but, my family, they're rice farmers, as are many people in these countries in the global south. And now they're suffering the consequences of frequent drought. And that's going to become more common. They're going to have to migrate. Where are they going to go? They're going to come here. Our borders are shut. They need options in their countries. They need solutions. One solution I was talking about is desalination. It's when you take seawater and you turn it into drinking water. It works. It's proven. It's been used before. Guess what? It requires huge amounts of energy. So even the solutions they could implement, they cannot at this moment, because they haven't got the resources and the infrastructure that we've got that's going to, protect us. So all of these things are really important to talk about, because for a long time we've heard the opposite in these green groups, and I was one of them. I was one of those voices. So I'm kind of, I correct my wrongs, even, having made peace with, all right, I have a lot of different views to these people in this movement. Actually, we've been saying the same thing for a long time, and it hasn't really worked, right? Just saying people should live with less for a long time hasn't actually worked. We continue to find new, novel ways to use more energy. So let's instead focus on clean energy options, because actually it benefits everyone. You get cleaner air, you get lower emissions, and there's no harm with wanting a good quality of life.
So take us to your founding of your new website, Emergency Reactor. I was really struck by the emergency vibe of your campaign and your social media. The point of that is to push the public to have a serious conversation about nuclear energy and the fight against climate change. So what was the transition tipping point for you to launch that?
I think it was what I was just saying, which is that I realized that we've been banging on about the same things for decades. For decades, we've been saying the same thing: live with less, drive less, eat less meat. I do all of these things. I never learned to drive. I've been vegan since 2002. I have done all of the things, and it hasn't made a difference. Let's be honest. We now have cryptocurrency. Now, that's not something that I am involved in, but I know that it uses vast amounts of energy. And actually, if we're honest and we look across the history of humankind, we are always good at using more energy. This is actually just something that we do. Look at the advent of the internet. This is just what happens. You get a better quality of life. You use more energy, even going right back when first ancestor discovered fire, and fire became the technology, and they use that for many different things to help develop drive human progress. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. It's just that we kind of need a fire 2.0 now. We need to move away from the polluting things. We realize they're bad, and that's where nuclear is actually, we're lucky that we have this option, because if we didn't have it, I don't know what I would tell people to do. Because saying live with less hasn't worked, even if we all did that, and most people are trying to. It's just so insignificant on our actual overall emissions. If you look at the data, most of them come from energy, because we live high energy lifestyles. We need a lot of energy for things like, hospitals, and, just being able to have lights on so that you can, not sit in the dark in winter. These are things that we've really come to take for granted, I think. And the solution is really simple, which is we replace the dirty elements. So let's look at fossil fuels for a minute. Everybody says they know fossil fuels are bad, but when you say fossil fuels are bad to people, they're like, yeah, okay, and they continue to boil the kettle. Electricity's coming from coal. They don't really care, so long as they don't have to live near the coal-fired power station. But it's coming from somewhere, right? Someone's having to live by it. We in Britain, we import coal regularly from poor countries where people have to live with the consequences of living next to coal-fired power stations. We would never allow one here. We will import all the time, especially when it's not windy or sunny enough, and that capacity of renewables drops. That's usually when we have to bring in the coal. So, and that's because we don't have a lot of nuclear. So I say to people, well, fossil fuels, even if climate change wasn't happening, pollution from fossil fuels kills at least 8 million people a year. It's very easy to look up. There's lots of good research on it. And that's a conservative estimate. And again, these are our most marginalized people. These are the people breathing the dirtiest air. These are women and children. This is, who suffer the bulk of the impacts of the climate crisis. And then we talk about climate change. That's how bad fossil fuels are. And that's before we talk about the fact that the whole industry knew these products were harming us way before we knew, way before scientists had got onto this and had solid research to say it. And they hid that data. And in fact, they put billions into funding climate denial. These are all real things. You can look them up. This really happened. If there's a bad guy in the room, there it is. Let's get away from that. So then you say nuclear. People have all the emotional reactions they should be having to fossil fuels. And it's really interesting to me that this happens, because you just think, but what did nuclear do? There's been a few accidents. The numbers of fatalities are about even from solar and wind. That's it. People in all sources of energy in these huge industries will sometimes have accidents, and there will sometimes be deaths, but they're very, very low numbers. And this was something that I'd been completely misled on. When I looked into the numbers, I was shocked. I was shocked at how misled I'd been. And then you look at the fossil fuel deaths, because I've just said millions from air pollution alone every year. Nuclear has never reached anywhere near those numbers, not even the thousands, really. And so, I've started trying to unpick that with people and unpick where those fears have come from, and say, there are things we should be afraid of. Climate change, let's be afraid of climate change. If you want to be afraid of anything, the impacts of that are terrible. It is going to hit the global south hardest. It's going to be worse for them. Those regions will become too hot for humans to live in. I mean, this is how serious things are. But approaching it with a doomress ideology, where you just sort of say, oh, well, we're all doomed, and we should just go back to living these really basic lifestyles, that is not going to help them. Actually, we have this problem as well in these green groups in the West. Again, it comes from having this privilege for so long, where we then say, we're going to live in an apocalyptic nightmare. Our children are going to suffer in an apocalyptic way. 2 billion people already live in that apocalyptic nightmare. It's called poverty. They already live with that instability. Look at what happened in Syria, which was driven by frequent drought, which was already been linked to climate change. Look at what's just happened in Afghanistan. This instability is going to impact those countries hardest that haven't been able to develop and have the stability that we have enjoyed for a long, long time. So it's really important that people understand that, for me, it's not specifically about nuclear. It could be spinach was a solution. I'd be advocating for spinach. It is a scientific solution. This is what the consensus says, which is that we need renewables and nuclear to decarbonize the planet. And that's it. There's no debate after that. You might not like it. You might have been against it for a long time. That is what the scientific consensus says. And it's the same scientific consensus that says that climate change is human driven and needs tackling. And that's a very scary thing. But luckily, the same scientists are saying there are mitigation options for decarbonization, and a combination of renewables and nuclear. It's the only way we're actually going to get away from fossil fuels. And the problem that I have with this is that for years I've been in these groups saying we don't need nuclear or fossil fuels. And now I've come to realize that all we've done is given fossil fuels a seat at the table, pushing nuclear away. And it's actually very easy, as I said, to push nuclear away. People get very scared very quickly. All these negative pop culture references in their heads. Actually, we should have that about fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are literally choking us and our planet. We don't seem to have a stronger response to it. So there's a lot that needs unpicking in that. And the reason I started doing it is, A, I felt guilty because I'd been on the wrong side, spreading misinformation years. And B, someone has to do it, because otherwise in 10 years, we'll be having the same discussion about how do we get off of coal? We cannot displace coal and gas without nuclear. That's why I'm advocating for it.
You've touched on one of my questions, a few of the points about barriers to the adoption of nuclear energy, which I think as part of your campaign, you want to see, be 50% of the energy mix. You mentioned personally that you had, a vision or a perception of Fukushima. And then you also just mentioned accidents. Obviously, with the podcast, we're interested in the waste issue. So maybe talk about the barriers to the adoption and your your personal feelings about that and how you're, what do you see in the environmental community, what people are talking about in terms of why they're against it?
I used to think that waste was this like green, acidic liquid. And this, let's be honest, this came from The Simpsons.
Yes, join the club.
Intentionally, but that is what I thought. So again, when I was kind of in my Fukushima period, looking into things, going, I believed all this wrong stuff about Fukushima. Was I wrong on everything? I got to waste eventually, and I had all the same questions. So I do understand people have those worries, because I had them. I've had these beliefs, and I found out that it's not liquid; it's solid. It doesn't leak if you put it in water. A tiny amount of kind of solid cylinders, and what they do is, yes, they take the uranium out of the ground, and it already has power in it. They use that power, so there's less, right? And then case it again in concrete. It's a really, really simple way of putting it. So it's actually a natural element that exists naturally in the earth. We take it, we use it to create clean energy, which is good, and then we bury it again. And the best example for me in terms of safety, because I know people worry about the safety, is, first of all, again, no one's ever been harmed or killed by nuclear waste. Like if they were, we would know about it. It would be front page news. It's never happened. And that even is true of Fukushima, where nuclear power station, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, got hit by a tsunami and an earthquake, had waste stored on site in these big concrete canisters, and they were not damaged. They bury it in such thick concrete, it's tested so that it can withstand anything. But that actually was a real life example. Again, if people had been harmed by it, we would have known. And I understand people are afraid of the idea, but it's not what happened. And again, you've got to look at fossil fuels, where actually people are harmed by fossil fuel waste all the time. You know what we're doing with fossil fuel waste? We're storing it in our atmosphere. How bad is that? That's how it's stored, right? Nuclear waste is actually really well stored, really well managed, and actually probably better of all of the industries, because I've read a little bit about solar panel waste, where the panels can't be recycled and they're just left in landfills, and they can be quite toxic, so they need to be recycled. I know people are looking into that, but nobody worries about that. Nobody cares. And they do contain cadmium, they contain lithium. These are toxic chemicals. So again, it's a case of really hyper focusing on this one aspect. It isn't that dangerous, it isn't that bad, it is really well managed. And you can't have anything that's zero risk. There's always a risk, but we haven't had anything happen. I've given you the worst case scenario of Fukushima. So I think we need to be careful about going for zero. Nothing has zero risk, right? Even a vaccination, we know they're safe for most people, but the occasional person might have an adverse reaction. You wouldn't say we don't have any vaccinations, because actually the consequences, more people will die of whatever it is you're vaccinating against. And that couple of people that might have an adverse reaction, it's the same thing with nuclear energy. There will be some accidents. There will. But you know what? Fossil fuel accidents, oil rigs catching on fire, Deepwater Horizon spill. How many animals were impacted by that? These are huge numbers that don't even get calculated. We tend to look at human deaths and not actually what's happening to the living planet. So it's just so safe compared to the alternatives. It's almost ridiculously safe.
So how have you tried to educate the public about this issue? Obviously, you have your website. How have you seen, what methods have you seen be successful in overcoming these types of fears?
So the thing I actually find really positive that makes me really hopeful is having the conversations is enough for most people. So there is a small minority of people that are just very anti. It's like a fundamental, almost like a religious belief, and you won't get through to them. And it's quite easy to spot that group and just think, my energy's not worth it here. And that's true, actually. In science communication, we learn that about vaccination as well. There's always like a small group, fundamental belief, just leave them. But most people are on the fence. They're in different groups, and the right information will help them to change their mind. So one thing that we have been doing is this Change Your Mind tool, where we take a bunch of volunteers and a bunch of free bananas, and we tour Britain with stalls in public areas, and we just invite people to have a conversation, and we have a banner about nuclear, and it's quite challenging for people. And I know that because I used to be the sort of person who'd be challenged, and you'd go up to you and say, who's paying you to do this? Why are you doing this? But they're all just ordinary people that come along to help out. It's a great team, really great community of kind of science-led environmentalists, which is really a growing movement, I think. And we hand out free bananas, and the reason we use a banana is because they're above above average radioactive. A lot of people don't know this because they don't understand about radiation. A lot of their fears of nuclear are about radiation, whereas actually everything's naturally radioactive. So it's a good conversation opener. Most people like bananas. And then, we have all the information. So whatever they think the issues are, it might be waste, or it might be radiation, or it might be Fukushima comes up a lot, or it might be something else. Then we just give them the information, and we have leaflets that they can go away and look up themselves, which actually I find people are very good at doing now, especially younger generation. They're very savvy about fact checking. So, you can say what you need to say, and then they can go away and look it up themselves. And most people I found have gone, oh, I actually agree with you. I didn't know any of this. So the problem is the lack of information and the huge amount of misinformation. And the reason I started doing these stalls is because I walked past one in Bristol, this big city here, which was an anti-nuclear stall. And I went over to the stall, and there was so much misinformation. And most of it was confusing energy with weapons, which is a totally different thing. It was very fear-based. It had this huge picture of the atom bomb, like really huge, and scaring people. And I went over and I said, shouldn't you be more scared about climate change? And it's actually a really, really scary thing. And they got very defensive and said, no, but we don't need nuclear to combat it. We can do it with renewables. And I said, well, nowhere in the world has managed to do it with renewables alone. In Germany, it's not for lack of trying. Germany has tried, and actually Germany's really struggled phasing out their nuclear power plants, putting lots of money into renewables, which is good. It's made them cheaper and more efficient, but had to use more coal in the meantime. That's what happened. So that's a good example. And they were kind of like, yeah, but it can be done other places. What about Paraguay? They did it. They had clean energy for a day with renewables. A day's great example on a sunny, windy day. But what about every? I had these conversations, but I realized I was kind of wasting my time because we weren't gonna reach any kind of agreement. I noticed a lot of passers-by kind of stopping and listening. They gave me this idea to go out and do what they were doing, but with actual scientific information, and with a lot of scientists who do come along to these events. We did one in Bristol, then we did one in London, and they're so successful. So for the London event, we bought 500 bananas. Each banana is a conversation because you hand it out, and they were gone like halfway through the day. We had hours left on the stall, and we couldn't believe like how many people wanted to come and talk to us. And there were even people where I'd open the conversation by saying, what's your opinion on nuclear energy? Do you have one? And the person would sort of say, but I don't know why. And then we talk about it, and they go, yeah, okay, thanks for telling me that. They just didn't realize. So actually just having the conversations is enough.
You touched on something about the waste that's very true, is that, it is in these temporary storage containers, it is safe, but they were never intended to be a permanent solution. And well know that scientists, you mentioned, it should be deep underground. So do you feel enough is being done for governments to uphold their responsibility there to permanently dispose of it and actually get it underground? And do you feel that if this happens more quickly, this might help overcome some of these fears about the waste and hopefully hasten its adoption as a clean energy?
Well, actually, there's an amazing new thing now, which is that they can recycle the waste. So this just happened. It started happening in lots of European countries where they've got a good program for nuclear, basically, and you can just constantly put it back into the reactors and use up power, basically. It's more complicated than that, but that's what we should be doing with it. That's what we should be doing with it. I don't know if you know, but when the Soviet nuclear weapons program was dismantled back in the early 90s, they actually reused all of that in nuclear reactors for energy in the US, which I would say to people is the best use of that's what we should do. In a climate emergency, we need clean energy, get rid of the weapons and recycle them into clean energy. This is great. This is a really good and cheap abundant energy for everyone. But there are lots of better things we could be doing. Unfortunately, we hardly even get to that point of the conversation. I think that's why it doesn't happen in a lot of countries. So if I get past waste and radiation and everything else in a conversation with someone at one of these events or in a panel or any discussion, we eventually might get to, you can also recycle it. You also got these SMRs coming in. You've got advanced tech, which is even more efficient. All of this stuff that governments aren't even considering that if they're still at this really basic point where they're saying, well, do people want it or not? And really people have to show that they want it more than they want climate change. That's what it comes down to. So that's kind of where I'm at with trying to push people in the direction, because then they can go away and they can find out themselves about, actually, we can recycle this stuff, and that's what we should be doing. And that, some countries do it, countries with good programs. For example, France France actually sells its waste to other countries who then recycle it, who reuse it. And France has had, over 70% of its electricity from nuclear since the 70s, because they built lots of reactors back when the rest of us were being anti-nuclear and made us more dependent on coal. I say to people, imagine if we'd all done what France did, we wouldn't be facing a 1.5 warming world right now. But anyway, we made that mistake, but let's not make that mistake for the next 20 years. It's basically my message. We do the stalls, and we do a lot of outreach, public speaking. Had a presence at COP, which was really good. And again, the same thing with people coming over saying, are you promoting this? It sounds bad. I thought nuclear was bad. And they're really shocked to see climate activists who are actually supporting it, but then they're very quickly on board when they go, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
You had a fun way of communicating your views. Like you mentioned COP26, I wanted to ask, you wore a wedding dress to promote the union between renewables and nuclear energy. That was a fun. Who's your audience? Who are you trying to reach? Who do you want to most inspire to take action?
So the dress. So the first thing is that it was the famous AOC dress that became that viral meme. But it said build more nuclear on it. So it's quite kind of recognizable and eye-catching. And you can see when someone recognized what it was, because they were like, oh my goodness, taking pictures, and then go, what does that message say? And someone actually came up to me and said, you mean that ironically, right? And I was like, no, we should build them. And I started saying decarbonisation pathways. He was like, no, I completely agree. I'm just shocked to see someone actually promoting it. And also that's very brave. And I said, it seems brave, but actually more people agree than you think. It's just that for a long time we've listened to these minority kind of angry, shouty voices, but a lot of people are actually on the fence or pro-nuclear, and that's part of getting that message out, making sure it's talked about. Originally, the idea was just to do this wedding, which was between nuclear and renewables. Nuclear was given away by scientific consensus, and coal turned up and tried to stop the wedding and take renewables away, booed him away using science. And it was just a very fun theatre. We did it several times at the entrance of COP, lots of people stopping and taking pictures and asking questions. So it was really good kind of public engagement, exactly what I've done, to be honest, in activism for years. It's just I don't even know if I'd say it's even a different message. It's still climate action. It's just not traditionally what people think of as climate action, because nuclear's in there. That's more what it is. It was interesting because we had a couple of hours, lots of people there's a whole team of us, and we need to get to the same site. So I kind of got dressed inside COP in the blue zone, and I was waiting in the blue zone under that earth, for people to turn up so we could go into the action. And just standing there, I could have just gone in the dress and just stood there all day, because everybody's walking in and out, all the world leaders and the amount of journalists that just ran over and were like, everybody looks different. Everybody's there in suits, and I'm just wearing this new dress. And also then saying, what is this message? It's actually a really good way of getting that message out there, and really unusual. And just standing there for 20 minutes, I got in lots of different press and lots of people coming over, and also people just coming over and asking, why is that the message? And that wasn't part of the intention, actually. I think really I could have just stood there all day, every day, and had an impact just standing there in that dress. It was more, we did the theatre piece, kind of public engagement, and we recorded it. And also just show people that it's okay to go out with this message and be creative about it. And we also marched on the climate march, because again, a lot of the pro-nuclear people were like, oh, we won't be welcome. And it's, don't be silly. Of course we're welcome. We're in the IPCC report. These are world's top scientists saying we need nuclear. That desperately needs a presence at these marches. But we did get a lot of people coming up to us and saying, someone from Extinction Rebellion came up to me and said, who's funding you? And I said, who's funding you? Because I used to be a spokesperson and I used to meet the donors. So I know, do you know? And instantly she was like, you're on lights, aren't you? No, I've earned my dues. I've got a right to be on these marches. I've been doing it for a long time. But it was quite a funny encounter. And it is challenging to people. It was challenging for me when my friend was talking to me about nuclear, and I've been anti for a long time, and I'm so glad and grateful that he did it. So now I'm just sort of doing that in the world, and there's no way I think to do it in a non-challenging way, because it's a very polarized issue. Same with vaccine communication, all kinds of scientific things now, GMOs, and that's just the reality of where science communication is at. But doing it in a fun way is a great way to put a community, make it fun, and just a human face on something that people see as this kind of Mr. Burns evil industry. No, that's the fossil industry. Nuclear hasn't done anything that bad, actually.
Tell us about some of the different opinions you observed in different generations, being at COP26, seeing, all sorts of, from activism to the country leaders. Is there hope that your generation and younger will finally be able to make change happen in the climate change fight?
I think so. I think my experience has been that younger people are so worried about, first of all, they're so worried about climate change. So that's their first worry. Whereas the boomer environmentalist generation, their first worry was nuclear because they grew up in the Cold War and it was scary. And they do use weapons with energy. And I'm always saying to people who bring this up that actually a lot of countries have a nuclear weapons program, no energy, and other countries have an energy program, no weapons. I mean, Britain has both. We have the bomb already. So it's not like we're going to get more weapons because we're getting more energy. Actually, we should take these resources from weapons and put them into energy. So there's a lot of those fears though in the groups who grew up around it. So I do understand that it's really kind of a deep, the C and D groups, especially some of the old school Greenpeace people, WWF, also very anti. And it's a shame at COP because there's a blue zone where we were based and there's a green zone, which is specifically kind of the green solutions, and all the nuclear applications that applied got rejected, which happens every year. But, that's got to change at some point because it is part of the scientific consensus. And yeah, so we were in the blue zone, and there were lots of amazing people there. You stand there all day and just talk to people. And a lot of people came over to us to ask us about nuclear. And again, I found mostly people are positive. There were a few antis, they were from that generation, and they're not going to change their mind. They did have their own anti-nuclear stall, actually, which I was surprised was allowed in at a COP. But I suppose they had fossil fuels involved as well. So anyway, so generally positive, but especially positive among the young members. And actually, if you look at the group that I'm part of, it is mostly, I mean, not to say it's never the older generation, because we do have a few amazing older members. It's mostly young people because they care more about climate change. So when they go and research solutions and they find nuclear's there, just straight away like, yeah, okay, why wouldn't we want that? The bit I'm trying to do is persuade them that actually we need to advocate for that really strongly, because there's a strong against it, which has had a lot of impact over the years. Whereas, for renewables, they don't really have that problem. Renewables, rewilding, tree planting, people love these things. It's great. I don't need to be out promoting them really. But nuclear is the bit that's missing. And it's actually one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle if you want to displace fossil fuels. So yeah, there's definitely a difference in the generation that's coming up. I'm really hopeful for them. I'm really hopeful when they become the politicians and the CEOs, they're going to make really good evidence-based decisions, I think. And a lot of the decisions that are being made now that are not very science-driven are from that older generation, because they're more ideology-driven. So one thing that's happening, we saw at COP, was this real kind of divide between a lot of pro-nuclear advocates and politicians, and a small minority of anti-nuclear ones who actually are very, also very, I mean, I don't know if you've seen this, but Austria's energy minister just said that Austria's going to sue the EU if they approve nuclear as a green energy source, which is ridiculous because all the evidence shows it doesn't contribute massively to air pollution, it doesn't drive catastrophic climate change. I mean, come on, you're safe living next to them. Anyway, but that's what's happening. So that is happening with these older school politicians. But even in countries like Austria and Germany, when they polled people, a lot of people don't want them to shut down the reactors, and a lot of young people especially don't. And I think especially in Finland, where they are very pro-nuclear anyway, when they polled people, they found young people were like really, really super pro-nuclear because they learned about it and they understand, and the older generation's still very anti. But I think that will change over time. It's just that we need the solutions now. So I'm trying to engage those groups now to go beyond just believing in it and actually advocating for it, and also just creating a space to say we do get to do this as climate activists. We have climate science on our side. That's all we need, really.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
Only that you should get involved with Emergency Reactor. We're really fun group to be part of, and we're always running lots of different campaigns that you can get involved with. Just go to emergencyreactor.org and sign up to the mailing list, because I send out what we're doing on the list in a newsletter every now and again. And you can follow us on social media pages, which is also a good place to direct people to if they have questions about nuclear, because we have this great team that answers questions, and they'll always give you resources as well, so you can go away and read at the facts. We're really on that. I think get past this kind of one just says something and you believe it. No, we'll say it, but we'll also back it up with research. And if you're still not sure, we've got climate scientists on board, we've got engineers, we've got people that can actually speak to you, and it's worth it. I know it seems like a lot of work, this kind of one-to-one engagement, but it's what we did actually in Extinction Rebellion when we started talking about climate change and no one was talking about it, and now everybody's talking about it. Is we went out and we gave talks and we talked to people and got the information out there. So don't underestimate the power of your voice and get involved.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Zion.
Thanks for having me.